Hey guys, welcome back. Section 16.2, sexual reproduction in plants. Now, for plants, they're a very unique structure in that they house or can house, if they're not reproducing asexually, and if they are a type of plant that reproduces sexually, they will house both male and female organs and use both male and female parts to become fertilized and to ultimately lead to the growth of seedlings that will develop into or can develop into a new plant. Now, when we talk about sexual reproduction, by definition, it's the process involving the fusion of nuclei of two gametes, which are sex cells, to form a zygote, which is a fertilized egg cell, and the production of the offspring that are genetically different from each other because you have the nuclei and genetic material from the mother and the genetic material from the father, so two sets of different genetic material fusing together to form that zygote or the fertilized egg. This little blurb here I'm going to provide for you in a cheat sheet of sorts. When we get into human reproduction, we will really hone in on some of these characteristics because this is talking about for humans, and I'm not going to spend as much time in this plant reproduction section talking about human beings having 46 chromosomes in regular cells and whatnot. So I'll give you this in a cheat sheet of sorts just so you understand if you see the word gamete or zygote, what it's talking about, okay? But let's go ahead and take a look at the advantages and disadvantages of sexual reproduction. For our advantages, increased genetic variation, which is a great thing. This is how we adapt over time, which is awesome in the way that we have been designed and created as humans to be able to adapt to our surroundings with genetic variation. Which leads into the next point. The species can adapt to the new environment due to variation, giving them a survival advantage. And then disease is less likely to affect the population due to variation. So think about the disadvantages of asexual reproduction in plants. For these types of plants, disease is less likely to affect plants that reproduce sexually because there's so much variation. But there are some disadvantages. It takes time and energy to find mates, and then it's difficult for isolated members of the species to reproduce. Now, most crop plants reproduce sexually, and this is an advantage as it means variation is increased and genetic variant may be produced. Sorry, y'all got sidetracked. But jumping back in, most crop plants that reproduce sexually have the advantage of a variation being increased, and a genetic variant may be produced, which is better able to cope with weather changes and even producing significantly higher yields for farmers. But the disadvantage is that the variation may also lead to offspring that are less successful than the parent plant at growing well and producing a good harvest. So it's a real trial and error type situation for some of these plants. So again, what we have in research laboratories all across the United States would be places like Mississippi State University, where your agricultural units within those universities are continuously researching plants to ultimately give us higher yields, resist disease, and ultimately feed us better and help our economy grow in better ways. Now, when we're looking at pollination, we are going to be seeing that flowers are the reproductive organ of the plant. They usually contain both male and female reproductive parts. They produce pollen, and that pollen is going to contain the male gametes. And unlike the male gamete in humans like sperm, pollen's not capable of locomotion. So we'll get to that in the human reproduction unit. But there must be some sort of mechanism to transfer pollen from the anther to the stigma, okay? And this process is known as pollination. And there's two mechanisms by which pollination can occur that our book's going to talk about, which would be by insect or like another animal like a bird. Or so insects that have the pollen that sticks to them, they crawl over to the different part of the flower and transfer it that way, or even transferred by the wind. I will say, as someone who gardens at home, you can also take a human, take the different areas that are creating pollen on your plant. I do this with my corn, and I make sure to get from the anthers that are growing the pollen, rubbing it all along the stigmas that are growing out from, or the silks is what we would refer to it in corn, that are growing out from that to help produce a higher yield on my cob of corn that's going to grow. So cool how you can do this. Parts of a flower, these parts and the structure are going to be provided for you in a diagram. So make sure you are taking that down with your notes. But ultimately, again, just to point out that this flower is the reproductive organ that contains the female stigma, and then the male anthers that have the pollen that are produced there on these stamens. Okay, and just understanding the parts of that. Again, provided for you in a diagram. Okay, we will pick it up here in the next section when we're talking about germination and understanding the different adaptations for pollination. So go ahead from here. You will head on over to your notes and your diagrams, get those down, take your CFU. You have a couple assignments. I know there's going to be a labeling quiz today with this information. You did a great job, guys, and I'm proud of you.